I believe a lot in human relationships, and when you establish those relationships, everything flourish and everything blossom. And if the right people cross your way, ideas happen, and great ideas happens, and then it just takes a small initiative to start a revolution again.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. The countries of South America have many influences and many expressions when it comes to cuisine. Peruvian food, for the most part, remains misunderstood down under, but one chef has led the way in introducing the depth and breadth and wonder of Peruvian food. Alejandro Saravia is the owner and executive chef of Farmer's Daughter in Melbourne. Alejandro, how are you?
Very good, Anthony. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of your podcast, and very excited to chat with you.
It's great to have you on the show. You've had an amazing influence and career in Australia, and really at the forefront of showcasing Peruvian food, but that's not the only thing you've been doing. But what was it like in the early days for you expressing Peruvian food to the food culture in Australia?
Look, I think, and we met just when I was starting the whole Peruvian revolution here in Australia, in Sydney, in around 2006, 2007, when I arrived. Look, it's incredible. I'm so privileged to be able to call Australia home after 18 years or a little bit more than living here, and at the same time starting in this country, promoting and showcasing, introducing my homeland cuisine. As you mentioned in the intro, back in those days, around 2007, 2008, Australians knew about Peru just because of Machu Picchu or the longest left wave that we have in the north coast of Peru that a lot of surfers from Australia were chasing and enjoying back in the 80s or 70s. But just that. And in the early 2000s is when Peru starts to be recognized internationally as the gastronomical capital of Latin America. A lot of chefs like Gaston Acurio, Virgilio Martinez starting his internships or his experience alongside with Gaston, and many other chefs ventured overseas to learn more of what was happening in the gastronomical world in Europe, in Asia, and then they brought all that knowledge back into Peru and start applying and discovering all these beautiful ingredients like quinoa, for example, kiwicha, the cacao beans from Peru that nowadays are very, very on demand. Meats like alpaca meat, for example, or all the different varieties of chilies that we grow in Peru, and that the biodiversity of the climates that we have in the coast, in the Andean Sierras, and then going down to the Amazon jungle, and all that started to create this gastronomical revolution in Peru, which I'm so privileged to be part in some way. Once I started working in Europe, recognizing the value of it. But then when I arrived here in Australia, which I have to be honest, my whole intention to come into Australia was to have a little bit of a break of the restaurant. The restaurant that I finished my stint in Fat Duck with Heston Blumenthal, and before that I was at the Ambassadors in Paris in the 3 Michelin star restaurant. So I was a little bit tired. I was very young. I needed to refocus, reimagine my career, revalue my goals as well. And I came into Australia because I had a few friends living in Sydney, and they were telling me how amazing the gastronomy my industry or hospitality industry was growing and blooming in around 2006, 2007. And I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I've never thought to come to Australia at that point. I thought I will spend a year, travel around. I'll probably enjoy a little bit of the surf here as well, and then make my way back to Europe through Southeast Asia. and and obviously, I fell in love with this country, with the opportunities that this country provides to everybody that wants to do something different and be part of it. And at the end of 2007, that's when I started thinking, why nobody's doing anything about South American or Peruvian cuisine in this case. There were a few very under the radar, very basic initiatives around that point. But everybody was focusing on Asian cuisine, in European cuisine. Frank Camorra was opening Movida in Melbourne. And to be honest, he was my inspiration on okay, I can if he can do that with Spanish cuisine, and a little bit arrogant at that point, being young as well, if not knowing his expertise and experience, I was like, if this chef can do that with Spanish cuisine, I can definitely do that with Peruvian cuisine. And I traveled to Melbourne, went to have dinner at Movida next door. And that's when I started thinking, well, I need to do something, and this is my opportunity to do something big in the industry that I love. So since then, I studied marketing and business in Peru after I studied my culinary degree in Le Cordon Bleu in Lima. So what I did was basically seeing Peruvian cuisine as a product, and how do I introduce a product in an existing market, a new product into an existing market.
Before we explore what you've created here, take us back to Peru when you were young, and some of the food and feasts that you had with your family.
Look, I come from a very diverse family. Half of my family is Italian, the other half is Spanish. We do have, obviously, we all grew up and born in Peru, so we also have that pride of being Peruvians as well. And we, as Peru is a multicultural melting pot of different influences. Nobody in my family cooks, I have to say, except from my grandmother. And I have to be very, very grateful that I spend quite a bit of time with my grandmother growing up in Peru, going to the markets, learning from the farmers, the producers, the market vendors in the markets in Peru, talking to them. And I think those are my first memories of hospitality or the food or being involved in food, because as it is here in Melbourne with markets, and also in Sydney in the fruit and veg market in Sydney, you establish that relationship with the market vendor, with the farmers, and if you go regularly, that relationship becomes a friendship, and it's not just a financial transaction of I give you money, you give me product. They actually start saving you the best. They find you new products as well, new ingredients. They save you the best as well, and you start learning from them, which are the experts on their field. And that interaction, that relationship caught my attention in a very early age on how amazing it is to actually know somebody that had dedicated their life and in some cases generations just on growing potatoes, for example. So you need to be super passionate to do that. And that was for me very admirable.
What led to a career in the hospitality industry for you?
So while I was growing up, there was always the ceremony of a Sunday long lunch in my family, in my grandmother's house. And every time that happened, I was I was there very early, helping in the kitchen. I remember I started in a very, very early age peeling peas, taking the peas out of the shell. And then you progress into a more intricate task in the kitchen. And everybody had a task, from my father, my mother, everybody involved in the family that was involved in that lunch had a task to set up the table, to prepare the cocktails, to make sure that the wine is open. And then there were cooks in the kitchen where my grandmother was going around cooking with them, tasting. And that organized chaos in the kitchen was always very appealing for me. After that, obviously growing up in Peru, we are exposed to a lot of different flavors, a lot of different influences, from Japanese influence, Chinese, Italian, Spanish, going to the native cuisine in the Andean Sierras and in the coast as well. And I was always very interested on how food get people together around the table. And my family is very much like that. Like, we are passionate about a long lunch, a long lunch that starts at 11:30 and then finish at 8 at night. But friends coming in, joins the table, stay for a while. They have a drink, a little bit of to eat, and then conversations flow. We're very fortunate that we know people from different backgrounds. And for me, that was hospitality. And I really, really enjoyed that. Then I met different chefs in Peru that started teaching me, or in some way exposing me to what to the understanding of the ingredients that they were working, and knowing that and that understanding, that education caught my attention a lot. So when I was 15, 16, I make a deal with my father. At the same time I was finishing high school, I was enrolled in Le Cordon Bleu in Lima, and that's when I started formally being educated as a chef in Peru. And then I took a year off and then went back to Peru and studied a career in university, which was marketing and business as part of the deal, because my father was, well, to be a chef, that's going to be your hobby, and then you have to study a proper career.
It led to, as you mentioned earlier, like time at the Fat Duck and Ambassadors as well. What was it like in those kitchens compared to what you had experienced back home in Peru?
Those kitchens gave me the opportunity to understand the modern side of a more structural way of working in the kitchen. I mean, in Peru, because the labor is a little bit less expensive than in other countries in the world, you get to have a bigger brigade in the kitchen. Things have changed, obviously, now, which is positive for the industry. But at the same time, most of the cooks or the chefs in that time in Peru, like late 90s, they were not officially trained, not formally trained. They had knowledge because their knowledge was passed on from a mother or a father that was a cook and started cooking in a restaurant as part of a trade. But it was not formalized. It was not established with parameters or techniques or a strong technical background. Going to Europe and working in those restaurants obviously opened up my interpretation and my understanding of what a chef was and what actually can achieve in the industry. It's not just in my opinion, it's not somebody that is just cooking amazing food and works with beautiful flavors. It's the leader of a whole area in a restaurant. It's a mentor, it's a business person, it's a public person as well, because you need to, it's a salesman, you need to sell your food to the customers. You need to explain it proper. You need to know how to communicate that properly, so it's appealing to a customer, so the customers are more inclined to consume your product, and that's what I saw in Europe. And obviously I'm making sure that like reaffirming or reassuring that techniques are very important. I remember I went there and I was working with a lot of molecular cuisine, and I was very lucky that working in those kitchens, they never exposed the young chefs directly to molecular cuisine from the get-go. It was more, you need to have your basic skills, your basic techniques down packed, and when they saw that you were on top of those techniques, that's when they slowly started to introducing the new ones, the modern ones. So your training didn't skip a step, which is important.
Back in 2006, 2007, when we met, you had a restaurant in Surrey Hills delving into the food of Peru. Take us back to that time. Do you have any stories of the challenges and successes of that period of time introducing Peruvian cuisine?
Yes, many. many. Look, I always look at those times. I arrived in Australia in 2006, so Morena was open in around 2010. I took the time to work in different restaurants in Sydney to understand and to be able to learn from the local culture, the local ingredients. Because even though Peru and Australia shares the Pacific, and we share a lot of the ingredients that we grow here and over there in Peru, I needed to learn more and understand more. And I, again, was lucky enough to choose the right restaurants to work around that time with amazing chefs like Grant Keane, for example. I worked with Guillaume in Benalong, and Nathan Darling in sales at Lavender Bay. So they were always very open to train, but also to have a good discussion about, ingredients, even though they were busy chefs and they were like always on the pump and running around, running good operations. The brigades were very well thought through and selected, and there was an amazing group of people working in those restaurants in those days, and that helped me a lot to understand the ingredients here in Australia. Like, I remember Grant was experimenting with molecular cuisine in Pierre back in those days. And even though I had the experience, he always said the same. It's like, you focus on learning about Australian ingredients and what we're doing, let us learn about this molecular approach. And he was in a corner trialing different things. There was some succeeding, some failing, but learning from the failures as well. So that approach was really good. For him would have been really easy to say, like, okay, you work with this, tell me what's the secret, But when I started Morena, I was very young as well, and it was my first restaurant. I probably still had at that point that approach that the chef needed to be all the time in the restaurant, absolutely every single minute and hour in the kitchen or in the dining room, and it was a great opportunity for me to lead my own team, do my own cuisine, make my own mistakes, and also celebrate the group's achievements. I learned how difficult is the restaurant industry in general, not only on the small margins that we need to maximize, but also working with different areas of, as I was saying before, marketing, promoting your restaurant, promoting your brand, hosting your customers, dealing with staff, and it's not just the dream of I just want to cook beautiful food for my guests, right? Being a new cuisine as well, it was challenging in the way of. Again, Peruvian cuisine was very undermined in the mentality of the Australian market in general, because nobody had done anything different or at the level that I was doing at that point with Peruvian cuisine. Everything was it was a very casual dining experience before, of a home cook that ventured into a takeaway shop, something like that, but nothing really well thought or trained or developed. And changing the mentality and changing the perception of the market was very it took a little bit of time. Again, I was lucky enough to meet people that support the concept, that understood the concept, or at least was trying to help to bring new flavors into the industry. Like that's when I met you, and we did an article, and I clearly remember that day when I cooked that green tamal. Coriander tamal and the confit duck Maryland on top with the salsa criolla. And see, those combinations of flavors, of textures, were never presented in a restaurant before in Australia and in Sydney. People like Joanna Saville, for example, at that time, the director of Sydney Good Food Month, I think she was always happy to have us as a part of the festivals and being able to do a master class in front of an open public stage in the Central Park in Sydney. And all those opportunities, I was wise enough to grab them and make the most out of it. And that is why I have to say that all that work was a process, and it was a planned process. I did have a plan on how to do this, and it worked out. It worked out. Now that now I'm so proud to see there are Peruvian restaurants popping up in Brisbane, Peruvian restaurants in Sydney. Obviously, here in Melbourne, there is a few as well, and I'm glad to say that in some way I paved the way for all these initiatives to come in, and I can't wait to see more initiatives to come, more chefs to come, and I'm pretty sure that a lot of them will do amazing things in the future for Peruvian and Latin American cuisine.
You made a move to Melbourne where you've had incredible success there. Tell us about that period of time. What was the turning point for you and the success that you've had in Melbourne?
Look, I moved to Melbourne because where we established Morena, the lease was expiring. It was only a small, a 2-year lease because the place was going to get redeveloped. At the end of the lease, the place never got developed, and we thought the restaurant was doing well. We thought, well, let's venture to a different area, a different site. We needed a bigger site, and we couldn't find anything in Sydney at the price point that we needed. Also, the industry in around 2013, 2014 was going to a little bit of a difficult time in that time in Sydney, and I met a group of people here in Melbourne that they were doing really good things in the Argentinian style or themed restaurants, and that's when I got approached and said, like, we want to open a Peruvian restaurant, and we have been to Morena. We got introduced by a mutual friend that he imports wines from Argentina, and then we got along. We were on the same page when we opened Pastuso here in Melbourne. Pastuso, I have to say that was the pinnacle of, not the pinnacle, probably the restaurant that has solidified my presence in the hospitality industry as a Peruvian chef, as a chef as well. Obviously, look, the location that we have, the Pastuso is in down on ACDC Lane. That was a part of the deal, and having number one, I think it was ACDC Lane, or being located in ACDC Lane in Melbourne. I was like, can it be better than that? And that's when I decided, well, I came in to Melbourne a few times, met a few chefs, dined in a few restaurants, and I saw that the industry was in better shape here at that point than what it was in Sydney around that time 2013, 2014. So I decided, well, maybe it's a good opportunity to branch into Melbourne, and that's when I moved here to Melbourne. I was working, being part of Pastuso until last year, and again I keep with me a lot of really good moments. I'm always going to be grateful for that restaurant, for what it made me and helped me achieving in the Peruvian side and the Latin American concepts here in the industry, and also the community here in Melbourne. I'm not comparing obviously Sydney or Melbourne in any way, because it's completely different. But when I came in here, I felt really at home. I felt that the community was embracing and was interested in what I was doing from the get-go. Maybe it's because I had already a little bit of a profile around that time. But like meeting chefs. I finally met Frank Amora in a festival, and for me that was like amazing. And Frank was the first ones to basically give me his number and said, hey, if you need any advice on suppliers or anything, please, reach out. The same as Andrew McConnell and Shane Delia back in those days as well. And I keep those relationships alive here. And for me that was amazing, because those were chefs that I always saw from the far, and that I admired for what they were doing, what they were bringing to the industry, and the restaurants that they were building.
These days you have farmers' daughters. Tell me a little bit about the concept and what you're doing there.
So farmers' daughters is a concept that started 5 years ago, and it was never meant to be a restaurant to start with. It was part of my own curiosity, being inquisitive, and part of my own self-development, as well as a chef, to understand where ingredients coming from, where I was located as well, trying to look for that sense of place, sense of identity. At that time, my first son was born, Lucas, and for me that was it was a big issue that I needed to learn more about the place that I consider home, and that ventured me to start traveling more into the regions, talking more with farmers, producers, and the region that I started researching or exploring was Gippsland. And that's when I started learning more. And obviously, as you know, Gippsland is super big. It's the biggest region in Victoria. It's probably I will be venturous to say that it's one of the richest regions in Australia in terms of diversity of products that you can find, microclimates as well. And I started exploring. I started meeting people, and again, I believe a lot in human relationships, and when you establish those relationships, everything flourished and everything blossomed. And if the right people cross your way, ideas happen, and great ideas happens, and then it just takes a small initiative to start a revolution again. And that's what I started in Gippsland. I never, when I started discovering and understanding all the ingredients that are coming from that region and the beautiful people and culture that Gippsland has, I never understood why nobody was doing anything to promote this region like they do in Europe, you know? And so I took the challenge and I started sourcing most of my products from Gippsland. I started talking with a lot of producers, a lot of farmers in Gippsland, and also I created the Renaissance Gippsland lunch that was a lunch that it was basically set up in a farm in Gippsland for 200 people, and I was going to cook with a group of chefs, friends of mine, but in a campfire setup with ingredients only sourced from that part of the region. I presented that idea to Melbourne Food and Wine Festival. I think the first one was in 2017. Yes, 2017. And, 2017, 2016, around that time. And Melbourne Food and Wine Festival was very kind to embrace the concept and say, yeah, we'll put it in the schedule. But just to let you know, at that time, there were like most of the regional events at this scale, they never succeed because, you know, you're asking for 200 people to come. I mean, your ticket prices they're not cheap. I know that it's going to be value for money, but just be careful and think about it. And my personality is, as soon as somebody tells me that, I'm determined to make it. So we put all our resources on it. I started promoting the event, and we sold out. 2 weeks before the event, which was amazing. And now we had 200 people coming to a beef farm to dine with us in the middle of the paddock. So we moved a lot of contacts, we moved a lot of logistics, and we made it happen. And the first one was amazing, you know, like it was, imagine 5 buses or more coming in through the farm, parking in on the side of the paddock, a nice marquee in the middle of it, fire happening outside, and then suddenly we got beautiful wine from South Gippsland, and I have to say Philip Jones was an amazing support from Bass Philip in those days, and Philip was pouring Crown Prince wine, Pinot Noir, in the glasses, like free pouring, and he being around, and Paul Crock, the beef farmer, was there as well. A lot of people like David Jones, the garlic farmer from Mirbo North. We had a lot of personalities, a lot of great people that were passionate about the region, passionate about the ingredients and what they were doing. So I thought, this is exactly what I want to do. This is the next step in my career. Is what I want to be. I want to be discovering this more and more, and get that sense of place, get that sense of identity that I think still it's important for me to pass on to my kids, my sons, Lucas and now Gonzalo, which is 4 and 3, and I think that's important. So that's how Farmer's Daughters started, and then. After 2-3 Renaissance lunches, I got approached by Tennis Australia. Being a tennis fan, I said, yes, whatever you want to do, I do. And that relationship has been a long and beautiful relationship with the people of Tennis Australia as well. And I was part of the chef series where I got to bring that concept of promoting a region like Gippsland into Melbourne. So we did 4 dinners with Gippsland produce, farm to table, real farm to table, like we have farmers coming from Gippsland dropping up the ingredients so we can prep it in where the Australian Open happens. And a lot of the farmers came in for the dinner as well. And one of the things that I like, as you probably noticed by now, I like to talk. So for me was, I need to go out into the dining room and tell those stories of the farmers, tell my story as well of traveling through Gippsland, and directly to the customers. And that's how the experience was. It was, yes, we were cooking in the back. My team was serving, and I was on front serving. I was on front telling stories. I was on front talking with the customers, tapping every single table in a certain point of the journey or a certain point of the dining experience, and telling those stories, telling my story, telling the farmers' story. And I think that is when I saw there is a concept here, there is a restaurant here, there is actually a purpose here that we can develop so we can bring Gippsland to Melbourne. Because for those ones that they don't know how far Gippsland is, just to get into Gippsland, you have to drive an hour and a half. That's the limit between Gippsland and Melbourne. And then if you want to go 2 hours drive, is just when you started seeing this beautiful scenery of green rolling hills, or Wilson's Promise is almost 2 hours and a half drive. And for Victorians back in those days, before COVID, that was a long drive. So they weren't exploring. Now, after COVID, people are venturing more and more into the regions, which is amazing, and it's beautiful to see.
How much have these connections that you fostered and this understanding of the region, how much has that changed your cooking and what you're doing at Farmer's Daughters?
I have to say that my cuisine, and I was having a chat with a chef friend of mine the other day about this, because at the beginning it was very intricate, very like every young chef, I wanted to put all my tricks on one plate, and then slowly you realize that you can't do that. Now my cuisine is more respectful to the ingredients that we work with. I like to say that, and I am proud actually to say that the menu is dictated by the farmers rather than the chef. So we work with what the farmers give us. We work with the knowledge that we acquired from the relationship that we have with the farmers, the understanding of the ingredients that we have with the farmers. And then it's our expertise as chefs on how to treat these ingredients with different techniques, what we're utilizing, what we are working with. But I'm trying to, and unconsciously, I'm transforming less and less the ingredients that I work with, because I work with the best ingredients on season directly from the farms. So for me, it's like, this is the best carrot that you're going to eat. Why should I boil it, blend it, and then set it again with agar-agar, for example, and make a paper out of it? No. you know what I mean? It's beautiful. That kind of cuisine has its time, has its place, has its part in the gastronomical history. But I think now we are more mindful and more grateful of going back to the basics, having the opportunity of going back to the basics and appreciating things for what they are, not for what they need, what we think they need to be.
This change and journey that you've been on, what impact has it had on you? Has it changed you, this different focus in regards to food? Yes,
100%. I mean, it's not only changing me in the way I see food, or I see my career as a chef and restaurateur. It's also changed the way I interact with people. I'm trying to give them more time. I try to value more the time that I spend with people that I admire, that I value, that I care, and I try to show them that I care by giving them the time. And it's the same with the ingredients. It's the same with the menus. It's not a rush anymore. It's not. I'm taking the time to do what I love and enjoy and enjoy the process, and not just chase the next big thing.
Well, Alejandro, I know that there's so much more that we can talk about, so perhaps we'll have to catch up again in the not too distant future and have another big chat. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Thank you very much, Anthony, again. And again, as I said when you sent me the invite, it's a privilege and an honor to be part of your podcast. I've followed it from the beginning, and it's great. Thank you very much.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.